Most of us are average, yet, if we're honest, don't want to be. You probably think you are, but what if you're wrong and you don't even realize it yet? There's two fictional teenagers that realize something that most people never figure out: exactly how to find it. When we look at those around us doing such incredible things, seemingly getting what we want with so much less effort, it's frustrating to realize that because you either lost a genetic lottery you had no control over, or just simply started too late, that you may never become anything exceptional. This is the position Oikawa Tooru and Isagi Yoichi found themselves in their teenage years. Haikyuu's Oikawa not only found himself completely unable to defeat his rival, seeing him as an utterly insurmountable wall of raw power, but also simultaneously had to watch a younger player catch up to him in no time. An undeniable prodigy who seemed to be on course to completely overtake him in the near future. Meanwhile, Blue Lock's Isagi, following a loss at national qualifiers against a player known as Japan's Jewel of Soccer, Ryosuke Kira, thought that was the end of the line. He resigned himself to the idea that they were from different worlds, that there were players like Kira who were simply built to go on to great things, and he wasn't one of them. Which, let's be honest, isn't completely unreasonable. Not everyone can go pro after all, so this was a pretty logically sound conclusion from him. Yet, it was utterly wrong, as we'll come to. Because a few years down the line, both Isagi and Oikawa in their own ways would go on to become phenomenal players at their respective sports. And the side of them that made them average is still very evidently there, but a talent they didn't even know they had is there alongside them. But how did that happen? Where did that talent suddenly spring from? Well, I think there's a few factors that went into it that are completely applicable in real life as well. Firstly, coming from Isagi is just simply intensity, specifically born from the rewards of it. Back before he went to Blue Lock, the mindset drilled into him was just play for the team. Whether we win or lose doesn't really matter. And there's obviously nothing wrong with having hobbies, etc. where that is the case. But what do you think happens if you took those same 22 players and instead told them that there was a £10 million prize for the winner? That match would look totally different. Likewise, tell them a year from now they'd play in a match with a £10 million prize. The progress they would make in that year would be totally different. You've probably already experienced this. If you go for a run by yourself, you simply won't run as fast as when you're competing in an official race against others. Or you're in an interview, you get asked a difficult question, you can feel your brain working overtime to answer it because the stakes are there. It has to. You can't lose that opportunity. Something I touched on in my Nagi video is that a lot of people have almost lost hope for themselves. Everything feels meaningless. They don't have any real belief that they could get big rewards or even any rewards at all. And so they never try. It's very hard to convince someone that they should do something they see no benefit in. If you've never had a big success before, the idea of aiming higher seems either laughable or scary. It sounds outrageous to say that it could be you up there one day when you've not got any evidence it could be. But the genuine belief that it could, that there'll be some reward, some meaning to all the work, will push you far harder and further than you'd ever get by thinking it was impossible. And that might be the only real difference between you and those around you. And the number one thing that stops you from really trying is probably your phone. Because it's always easier to scroll on your phone than to do the important things that you need to do. I've done this a ton. I tell myself, I'm just going to scroll 5 minutes and I'll get back to it. And then an hour is gone, the whole day is gone, and I wonder how this has happened again. Which is why I started using an app called Reset, which makes overcoming social media addiction super easy. Because it literally forces you to be productive in order to earn your screen time. You turn it on and every addictive app immediately gets blocked, so that you don't need to rely on willpower. So that instead of just mindlessly opening Instagram constantly throughout the day, every time I feel a bit bored or a bit down, I have to go and do something productive instead. I have to earn that screen time first, then get it as a reward afterwards. My favorite feature has to be that it automatically tracks my good habits like sleeping, walking, not using my phone, and then gives me screen time back as a reward. So it becomes literally impossible to waste an entire day doing nothing. Doom scrolling is wasting your life, You know that, and Reset gives you it back. So make sure to use the link in the description or in the pinned comment, download Reset and use code ANIME. And once you do get that time back, you'll be amazed how much more you can do. Because it's very likely that you've never used everything you have, especially not over a long period of time, that you've never been in a situation where your real potential has practically been forced out of you when your back's against the wall. I suppose a good comparison is in the early levels of a video game, you don't really need to optimize much or use everything available. You can just clear the enemies with not even a half of what you're actually able to do, so you won't bother trying to maximize your output. You operate way below your actual ceiling. But once you get to the more difficult levels where it requires you to do everything that you're able to do, then you finally start to. Some of you might have never tried at all, and yet you're convinced that you don't have talent when you have no idea yet. In Isagi's case, up until his showdown against Team V, if a pass came in, he'd always taken a moment to control it before shooting, which is completely reasonable because volleys are hard, right? But with the threat of his career ending if he lost and the most skilled opponent he'd ever faced right behind him, he was forced to simply once you play do
get
at a
that
higher
time
level.
back,
He had
you'll be amazed
no
how much
time
more
to
you
control
can
the
do.
ball here. He had to try volleying it for once, and it worked. But he likely could have always done this. The talent, the ability was there within him. He just didn't know it yet because he'd never tried to use it yet. You may very well have something too that you are just unaware of right now because you've never needed to really push yourself. I doubt anyone would argue that if their life was on the line, they would perform better. You'd find you could do a lot more than you would do otherwise. But how can you actually create that kind of intensity for yourself? Especially when you're probably not going to get an invite to a legally questionable facility with 299 other strikers to compete in a football battle royale. Well, I've spoken a ton in previous videos about how aiming a little higher than you're comfortable with can often bring out that same effect. Honestly, it's one of the best things you can do for yourself. You will very quickly realize just how much you are underestimating yourself. Also, having a rival can help a lot with this. There's nothing quite like the extra push that competition gives you. You're never too tired to do what you need to do when you've got someone you want to beat, even if it's all friendly. And following on from that, remember how I mentioned Oikawa had a younger rival who was catching up to him? Well, that day inevitably came. He lost to him. And by this point, he was already doubting his whole career. He'd done incredibly well, but he thought that he was just not gifted enough to make it any further. So he sought out advice from a very experienced coach named Jose Blanco. And again, I want to emphasize that Oikawa was a really good player by this point. He'd worked exceptionally hard, he'd won the best setter award in recent tournaments, and even the people he thought was above him genuinely respected how good he was. Yet he still had these doubts that he wouldn't make it, that this could never work out because he just doesn't have that innate talent that some of his peers do. And Blanco didn't try to tell him that he was better than he thought. He didn't tell him, oh, just keep working hard and you'll definitely make it. He just asked him a very simple, very honest question. Are you really claiming you know what your limits are? There's still so much room for you to grow physically, mentally. There's tricks and strategies he could learn. Can you honestly, genuinely say, at this moment in time, that you know what your full potential is? That you've tried everything and for long enough to say that there is nothing more you can do? I think you'd be surprised. Researchers analyzed more than 34,000 top performers across multiple fields, and they found that 82% of international level junior athletes never reached that level as adults. Likewise, 72% of adults at that level weren't there when they were younger. There's just a 10% overlap. 90% of them were different individuals. Maybe where you are right now isn't as important as you think. And so, Oikawa, like all of us, could have taken the easy route of throwing up his hands, declaring he's not gifted and it doesn't matter, which I think a lot of us are guilty of. I certainly am. But there's another route, and it is far longer, tougher, scarier, of believing he's still got more potential and continuing to try and reach it. I think anyone who's gotten into any pursuit for a length of time would say that there is far more to it than outsiders would appreciate. That it's far more complicated and involves far more skill than they initially realized. And yet they won't consider the idea that it's still the case for them as well. That there may be some skill or playstyle that they haven't discovered or considered yet, and they could end up being exceptionally good at it. I think in our heads we assume that we just know right away if we're naturally good at something or not. Or at the very least, we'd find out within a few months. But what if that's not always the case? To go back to that video game comparison, there might be an ability or item that you would end up being exceptionally good at using, but you don't even know it exists yet because you haven't gotten far enough in, and you're thinking of stopping before you even get to it. Oikawa is a great example of this. He'd always assumed volleyball was won or lost by the individual skills of each team added together. Although he obviously continued to focus on his individual skills, he would then put far more emphasis into polishing his ability to bring out the absolute best of his teammates, something he turned out to be exceptionally talented at. Likewise, Isagi is now known for his unbelievable spatial awareness and ability to basically play chess with the football pitch, and he'd been playing for over a decade before he even became aware that this was a talent of his. When he first arrived, he didn't have an answer when people asked him what he was best at. He thought it was nothing, and he was wrong. But I actually have some pretty solid proof that this all likely applies to you as well. I used to work as a maths tutor, and something that permanently stuck with me was often I'd give a student a question, they'd look at it for a few seconds and essentially decide that they couldn't do it. They didn't even have to say it, I could just see it on their faces. They evidently figured that they just hadn't been taught how to solve it yet, they didn't understand it yet. In short, that they just weren't capable of doing it right now. What is incredibly interesting is all I ever had to say 95% of the time was, don't worry, you know how to do this. And within a few seconds, they'd go, oh yeah, it's just this, and this is how I do it, etc. And they'd start making progress on it. And what's incredibly interesting is, one, how your brain will look for a solution when it thinks there is one, and won't when it thinks there isn't. And two, I saw this so often that it confirmed to me that most of us actually have no idea what we're capable of doing now, let alone several years down the line. Because we don't have someone looking over our shoulder saying, actually, you can do that. Those who look for a way to do something will eventually find it. Those who simply accept what they are and don't continue to step further will obviously stay there. And honestly, unless you're at a super high level, you can probably learn to do everything that those around you are doing. It probably isn't talent, I've done this, it's easier to write it off as that, but in reality, it's probably just, he's doing X, I'm not. It's summed up very nicely in Haiku. Know your weaknesses, accept them, forget the weapons you can't wield, find all the ones you can, and carefully, persistently, hone all of them to a wicked point. But again, I would not be quick to write it off as a weapon you can't wield until you practice it for a long time, and something that will help you both stick to it for long enough and bring out the necessary intensity is doing it in a way that actually excites you and probably feels kind of risky. Oikawa refused to take the easier route of joining Shiratorizawa, which would have guaranteed him nationals and from there a pro offer. Isagi refuses to settle into being a midfielder despite mounting pressure and evidence that he'd actually be very effective there. I made a whole video on the dilemma of doing what you're suited for versus doing what you're excited by, but if you see yourself as someone who can't go far, who should settle and take what they can get, that will be as far as you go. The intensity I mentioned at the start just won't exist anymore. Sacrifices will likely have to be made. You can't just do whatever you want, but you can't be timid. You can't settle into an option that's just going to kill the fire, and you don't have the luxury of not taking risks, but you shouldn't be afraid to anyway. The fear of committing years to something and having it not work out is understandable, but spending years on something and not improving at it at all is incredibly rare. And in the worst case scenario, you will regret not trying and not knowing far more than you'd regret the attempt. Instead, just think about where you could be in a few years, and then again, set that target a little higher, because you don't know your limits yet. And the only way to find out where your ceiling is to stop assuming that you've already hit it.